Welcome, everyone, to this exclusive Nobody Studios live stream show. My name is Sejal Thacker, and I'm your host for today's session. Today, we have a distinguished panel of guests joining us, and who are going to be taking us into the future world of venture studios. And so, for those of you that are unfamiliar with venture studios, basically, venture studios are organizations that build companies, right, by providing resources, capital, talent, expertise to help entrepreneurs take their innovative ideas into successful startups. So today we're going to be talking about some key topics that are really going to be shaping the future of venture studios and the broader startup ecosystem. So I want to welcome back two of our guests, our visionary leader and chief nobody, Mark McNally, and our VP of Research and Innovation, Donald Farmer, back to the show. Welcome back.
Hey guys.
Thank you. Great to be back.
Great to see you both. So for those of you that are joining that don't know Donald Farmer, he's joined us a couple of times on prior live streams. So make sure you check those out. They're all on our YouTube channel. But Donald, you're a pivotal part of our studios team. And so can you share a little bit with the audience about what your role at Nobody Studios entails? And I love asking people that join us about what inspired you to join our Nobody Studios journey.
Well, I'm so I'm involved with research and innovation. That's really what I do. I kind of head up the research and innovation process. And what inspired me? Mark inspired me is the simple and short answer. But not just that I wanted to work with Mark again. It was also that there's a vision here about how we can do something differently. One of the key things in my thinking is I'm not interested in doing things better. I'm much more interested in doing things differently and better, and not just incremental, but doing something that's actually genuinely radical and transformative. And that's what Nobody Studios, I think, is doing. So that was the inspiration, and I'm glad to say it's living up to its billing. It's fantastic.
I've shared this on a few other podcasts, but early on, first of all, I coach founders to say, when you get your head around your idea, don't keep it in your head, start talking it out loud, because you'll start to learn where it's rough around the edges. You'll get feedback, and if you're onto something, you'll know. And I practice what I preach with the studio, because as soon as I had my kind of head around the thesis and the vision, I did a soft circle around my network of people that were just going to tell me what I wanted to hear, because I needed that early. And then I did this next circle of people that were smarter than me and would have no problem telling me I was completely crazy. And Donald was in that second circle. Even though I consider him a friend, he'd have no problem telling me that my dog's ugly. And we got on a call, and I got done with the whole pitch for 20 or 30 minutes, and I was just bracing for impact. And Donald's like, this is sufficiently intriguing, or something that was just Donald-esque. And yeah, once I realized that he wasn't throwing rocks at me and that there was something here, but he realized it was appropriately crazy, and that was worth getting out of bed for. So yeah, God bless you, Donald.
There you go. Appropriately crazy. That's a good thing for a Friday.
No, and we wanted to invite you because when Mark and I were talking about what topic we wanted to talk about today, he's like, I want to do something that's like futuristic, looking at sort of where we're headed, and I was like, both of us were like, let's see if Donald's available to join us for the show, because we knew you'd have some valuable insights for everybody today. But so one of the topics I wanted to cover with both of you was, obviously everybody wants to know, artificial intelligence is becoming a driving force in a lot of different industries, right? Especially and including venture studios. And so, Mark, maybe you want to kick off the discussion with, how do you see the role of AI evolving within the venture studio world?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think it reminds me of earlier in my career. The company that got me into the startup path was a B2B e-commerce company in the early days of the startup world, or the internet world. This is the late 90s when the internet was just becoming a thing, and we were still getting on the internet with AOL discs, But I built a company that went public, and that was back when people talked about it as an internet company. So you had someone doing, I'm going to sell, pet food online, and someone else was trying to sell cars online, and someone else was trying to do something else online. But they were all internet companies, because essentially it was the way we used to do things, but now with internet involved. And because my company ended up going public, and all friends and family associated me with being a part of one of those internet companies, I would get all kinds of phone calls and emails from folks. It was like, you got to talk to this guy. He's got this great idea. He's building an internet company. And I realized that really quickly that term became very like non-descriptive, right? There is no such thing as an internet company. Today, everybody's an internet company, right? And I believe that's exactly what's going to be happening in AI. So I think what you're doing is, it reminds me a lot of the late 90s, is people looking at existing business models and saying, how is this going to change in the internet paradigm? And now people are looking at the same models and saying, how is it going to change in the AI paradigm? But AI itself will not be descriptive enough to say what's really unique about what you're doing, right? So I wanted to share that. I think that how it's going to change studios is on the same way it's going to change a lot of companies. It's going to change how you work. You're going to be looking at a lot of your processes. You're going to be looking at a lot of your people. You're going to be looking at a lot of things that are cost centers, or you're going to look at things that are limitations to your growth, and you're going to internally reinvent, how AI can play a role. Some of that will be internal. A lot of that will be tools and services that someone else will build. You'll say, oh, I can use that, and now I'm more effective. So definitely AI will affect just the operations of a studio. But I think it'll also play a big part in what companies, ultimately, the most important part is what companies we choose to build. One of the paradigm shifts we had in the studio early on, or the beliefs, was that the speed of innovation was starting to go so fast that in the old days, and just give a contrast. In the old days, my first startup that went public, we had a data center that we spent $8 million building, and it was on raised floors with air conditioning and halon fire extinguishers. Today you just spin that up in AWS for $1,000. So, but back in those days, building that gave you some defensibility, because no one could easily do that. So you had years to figure out your market, and any kind of traction you got in your market, you could defend it because it was hard for someone else to spin up. Today, that's not true. Today, the speed of innovation is going so fast that I think that when you decide what to build, you automatically have to put yourself into what are the disruptions, not in the next 5, 10, 15 years. What are the disruptions in the next 5 months that are going to make that idea obsolete? And anybody who's watching the AI wars right now, it's fascinating to watch people with, essentially unlimited resources and data, like, the Googles and the Facebooks and the Microsofts of the world. They're literally one-upping each other day by day. I almost can't keep up with the sizzle reels and even give myself time to process what that last innovation means. So it's a really, really interesting time, but I do think it makes it harder and harder to start to figure out which companies you can build that are defensible. Now, I think that there's been a bunch of companies I've seen that say, oh, I see where AI is now, but they're missing this part, and I'm going to fill that part. And unfortunately, a lot of those are going to be dead on arrival, and there's been a lot of funding going to those companies, but they're going to be dead on arrival because the AI wars are going to leapfrog them before they even release their first product, right? But I do think that you get into a world that's, again, similar to the platform wars or the operating system wars, the browser wars, or even the big data wars that, Donald and I've lived through, which is you'll have these people make these massive platform kind of releases, but what'll actually be missing is the last mile. So connecting the dots to specific data sources or specific integrations that make that breakthrough valuable at the business level. So I do think you'll see more and more companies focus towards that niche or that last mile kind of focus. Anybody doing platforms, again, I think they're going to have to make sure they're truly going after white space that is way ahead of what you might predict to be a 3 to 5 year runway is probably only going to be a year. So you better be moving fast.
Yeah, those are all good points. Donald, did you want to add anything too? But I would love to hear your perspectives as well on how do you see the role of AI evolving, right, within the venture studio world.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think the point that Mark made, which is very significant, is about platform. When we think of the mega vendors in the AI space, people who are really kind of competing, building these incredible models that we're all amazed by, in a sense, what they're building is infrastructure. And that's really important because the companies which are going to emerge, just like in the internet, are going to be, yes, these are the big companies that are building the infrastructure. There's going to be fascinating companies built who then take advantage of their infrastructure. And I'm really interested in what that second generation looks like. We do have to look ahead of the next wave of development and say what is the generation beyond that. I was around. I'm old enough to have been around in the first wave of AI, where back in the 80s, really, when we were working with the older programming languages like Prolog and Lisp and so on, and we were building what they called expert systems. And then we had what was known as the AI winter, because they never really delivered what people expected. A part of the reason for that was there was no second generation. There was no second level of innovation to come after that. There was all this work you had to go into to build it in the expert systems, but then what would you build on top of that? Turned out nothing. And therefore, this didn't really succeed. And now we have this opportunity of looking not just at this generation, but the next generation. And it's worth remembering William Gibson's great quote, that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. Mm-hmm. And if you want to look at where this is going, you look at where some things are now, and they're absolutely fascinating. I was in Finland recently and talking to a forestry company, which has a big international forestry company, which has drones, and they have AI built into the drones, and they have analysis back at the office, but they can fly drones over forests in Indonesia and measure the growth of those forests on a tree by tree basis. I mean, they get to know individual trees, and they're back in Finland, and they're measuring forest growth in Indonesia using drones. And what's fascinating about that is that that's a technology that's in use absolutely right now. And then you apply that, and you think about if that's the future, where else can we apply it? And just the possibilities are absolutely fascinating. But I'm certainly interested in talking with people, meeting with people, and picking the brains of people who are thinking beyond the next wave. What emerges after that is what's really going to be fascinating.
Yeah, and I definitely want to pick your brain on some of the emerging technologies that you believe are going to be shaping the next decade, right? Because there's so much information out there, and you're actually doing the research, right, for the studio. So maybe you can tell us about some of the emerging technologies that you think we're going to be seeing more of.
I mentioned drones, and drones are sort of fascinating, and they're an interesting technology in themselves. But they're also an example of a technology that is, by its nature, tremendously decentralized. The drone flies off and does things. And that decentralization involves a couple of important technologies. It involves the ability to communicate at the end, to communicate remotely with these objects, whatever they happen to be, and also the ability to do as much computation at the edge in the object as is possible. And so you can think of a drone as being a remote object that can do its own computation, have its own intelligence. Well, there are lots of remote objects into which you could build your own intelligence. Everything from self-driving cars, but also to the kind of wearable devices are also objects which can have their own intelligence built in. So building intelligence into objects is actually going to be, and thinking of it in those general terms, is going to be absolutely fascinating. And I think that'll be a really critical technology. And I take the drone only as an example of this ability to compute at the edge, but that's where it's going to get really exciting. Another area that is becoming just going to be super important is virtual reality technologies. We've seen there's Oculus, we've seen the Apple devices. And I've tried the Apple devices in the Apple Store, and if they feel clunky is not the word, but they feel sort of heavy and a little bit of a burden just now, and you would need to be very committed to use one. But at some point, you won't need that commitment. They'll be as we know how these technologies kind of develop in the future, and they get lighter, they get more portable, they get more powerful, and in a few years, this is going to be absolute breakthrough technology, and we're already on that path. So again, we can see where the future is. I'm very excited by virtual reality for all sorts of reasons and in all sorts of scenarios. And it's going to transform healthcare. It's going to transform real estate. It's going to transform our entertainment experiences. It'll transform everything in that way. So these are really important technologies. And then finally, the third one, of course, is AI itself as a technology, not just as a platform. And there are, things that we can do with natural language, and things that we can do with conversational experiences. And I think conversational experiences are going to be very transformative in a lot of areas that we think of technology just now.
Yeah, thank you, Donald. I'm glad you mentioned AR and VR, because I was just, as I was mentioning to you prior to us jumping on, I've been seeing so many articles on that, and it's good to see that they're predicting some of the industries that are going to be disrupted or ones that we're focused in on at the studio, right? Some of the ones you mentioned: entertainment, education, healthcare. In fact, Dr. Eric Rees, our director of health and wellness, just posted an article today on LinkedIn that he wrote about some of the ways that we're going to be disrupting healthcare. So if you're interested in that, make sure you check out that article. He talks about advances in biotechnology and health tech, and how, the goal for the studio moving forward is to create new treatments and personalized medicine, really, and so that we can create, not a one size fits all solution, but really help people, empower people with that. So I'm really glad that we're focusing in on that area. And then, Mark, I wanted to come back to something you said earlier. You mentioned that AI is kind of streamline various aspects of the startup creation process, right? And you talked about how that's going to increase efficiency and effectiveness. So I wanted to make sure that we give an example to people how we're doing that at the studio. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about how Evalify is sort of disrupting that whole industry with using AI.
Yeah. So first of all, Evalify is a good example of one of our internal themes. We call the machine of machines. So anytime we can build a product that solves a problem that we have, or an opportunity that we want to seize that we know will be valuable for other people, then that's great, because we can build a commercially viable business and we become more scalable. Evalify is a really interesting product. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to go check out their site or watch their video. But essentially, it's looking at IP analysis for a new idea. And we use AI to extract all the relevant kind of features that you use to kind of score and search based on basically your pitch deck. You could upload a pitch deck from an early stage startup. AI extracts all those features from it, and we go out to a global database in over 150 jurisdictions and over 200 million different patents. And we basically look for conflicts. And in legalese, what we come back to is called a freedom to operate score. But we've created this really easy to use report that you get back in a matter of minutes that says, hey, based on what you're trying to build, here's some conflicts you might be aware of, you want to be aware of. We actually give you a score that's a proprietary score, saying on the scale of the spectrum that we've created, whether this is a wide open space that you're free to go out there and innovate in, or if you have a significant amount of conflicts. IP is a really interesting battleground space because it's emerging. I don't think many times in my entire startup career anybody's going to ask me in a funding scenario to do an IP analysis. Usually they might ask for, hey, do you have a patent? Can you send me the details? But that's more of like a due diligence, check the box kind of thing. But you have a number of really high profile examples of companies that have raised a lot of money, failed because of IP risk, or raised a bunch of money, had to pay a lot of it out in terms of IP conflicts. And that's another area where there's a lot of the big guys have massive patent libraries, and they've been actively acquiring for years. Google acquired Motorola, for example, simply for that reason. And Microsoft, you could argue, acquired Nokia for the same reasons. And so IP is becoming more and more of a battleground. There's a lot of incentive. The legalese of it's becoming stronger and stronger, so you can significantly lose a significant amount of money or disable your startup. So Evalify is just the easiest way. One click of a button, AI does the work and comes back and gives you a score and a full report of your conflicts and things you might want to be aware of, and also things that you could do to make your IP more unique, or at least land into more of an open white space. And we're excited about it. It's initially targeted to high volume investors. So when they're looking at a lot of different deals and they're getting late stage, they can use Evalify to kind of check to see if there's anything they should know before they invest. But it eventually, founders will use it. We see insurance companies using it. We actually have a significant amount of interest right now from IP attorneys themselves, who are like, you can produce something in a fraction of the time and cost than I can, and you just give my clients a whole roadmap of things they should hire me for. So yeah, we're finding a lot of really interesting early adoption and excitement, and it's one of our fast growers.
Yeah, no, I was at the pitch event this past week, and just learning about, how they're taking so much data right? They're looking at 200 million global patents in almost 170 jurisdictions, right? So this is something that is taking all of this data and then spotting trends or looking at what, you have to pay a patent attorneys tons of money to do, and they might still miss that information, right? That whole process is such a nightmare. So
yeah, not still miss, they're likely to miss.
Yeah, exactly.
The way you would search as an attorney is all going to be driven by your own biases and your own experiences. And we're cognitively challenged as human beings. We can basically pull on usually about 10 data points to process something cognitively. So when you're now suddenly dealing with, as you said, 200 million patents in 170 jurisdictions, and how many thousands of variations on a search term or a hashtag, it's impossible to expect a human to do that work. And we're excited about that. It's just an example of the kind of things we're trying to build moving forward.
Yeah, and not to mention in seconds, you get the result right back right then and there. So like you said earlier, make that informed decision on whether you want to continue to invest your time and energy and money into something or find a pivot or something adjacent that you can do, right? So
well, just something Donald said earlier, and I'll let him talk, but it's not so much about improving what was done before, because I don't think people did this before. I mean, I think they only did it in the most high profile examples. Like I said, I've been a part of 14 venture-backed startups. Nobody has ever asked me to tell me the risk profile of the IP I was building. And I actually believe that with this becoming so easy, and it's also it's predictive, right? So one thing that's important, if you understand the Valify pitch, is we actually went back 10 years and looked at companies when they were really, really young, like Uber. And Uber scored really, really high, saying, hey, this is a great opportunity. You could build a lot of IP in this space. And they turned into a $100 billion company. Great for them. If you scored Uber today, it would say, don't build this company because autonomous vehicles and ride-sharing apps, that's all been locked up for the last decade, right? Makes sense. We also scored one Jawbone, which raised $1 billion, and it scored really low. And this is on their early pitch deck 10 years ago, saying, wow, there's a lot of IP here you need to be aware of that's going to be conflict or friction as the company tries to grow. And that failed, ultimately costing investors over $1 billion. So the idea that is a data point, that's not the only data point that tells you to invest or not. But I do believe you're creating a market where once people start to use this, I say they're going to feel naked making a decision without this data point, because the unknown risk will be too scary.
Absolutely.
And I think the possibility of looking at something and saying, this is actually a really good idea, but if you move it a little bit in this direction, you're going to have even more value in your IP. Very often ideas are so close to being unique, so close to being different, but they just need some development. And actually working out what that development is very difficult. But with this, it gives you a map of the landscape and enables you to find space in it that you can flourish. And that's like the drone flying over the trees. This tree, put a bit more fertilizer on this one. This one's going to be a great tree. It's like that.
Yeah.
Colin, can we use AI to autonomously name each tree? Can we have like hurricanes? You refer to like Cynthia 5 and.
It wouldn't surprise me if they do that. I'm sure they've already got IDs. So if they've got IDs, they can have names.
Mark, I wanted to just give you a circle back to you because Donald talked about several different emerging technologies that might disrupt some industries. Did you want to add any to that list?
Well, there's a lot, but I think there's a few things that intrigue me that weren't on that list. I think that nanotechnology is going to transform entire industries, and our ability to really understand at the molecular level what makes something strong or weak or resilient, or you're going to understand what makes a 4-inch thick piece of iron a good piece of armor, and you're going to be able to translate that into paint. And you're going to be able to put it on cardboard and make it just as strong. And that's going to transform every single industry, right? So that kind of stuff fascinates me. I think our understanding of the brain is the closest thing to the ocean we can talk about in terms of how much that can transform us as humans, the things we struggle with, unlocking potential, maximizing sleep, releasing traumas. And that's from, on one end, how we treat it, which will be partially pharmaceutical, but also I think plant medicine and psychedelics is going to play a big part of unlocking consciousness and different parts of our brain, which I'm excited about. but also harnessing the power of the brain. Right now we are just barely understanding the brain, at a super kindergarten level if we're lucky. But we can start to look into the brain using some of these emerging devices. And you can see what the brain is doing as it's processing things, as it's looking at things, as it's dealing with things, emotions, whatever. And it's giving us the ability to basically read the brain. And I think that goes into a space that's really, really fascinating when you think about, maybe trying to get hypnotized to understand what you're thinking or go through years of psychotherapy or something else. Like, you actually can go into the brain and understand it. You'll be in a spot not too distant future where you'll be able to play back full definition versions of your dreams last night. So I just think, again, the track that we're on to understanding our brain in the next couple of decades is going to be mind-blowing kind of stuff that's on the category of what we're seeing with AI, if not bigger. And those are just a few. I think longevity breakthroughs and our understanding of biochemistry, again, is just going to be transformational. Example I was talking to the other day with a colleague was that, cancer sucks. A lot of people deal with it. It's affected a lot of people. And unfortunately, right now, the mainstream treatment is chemotherapy. And chemotherapy is a very rudimentary process at best. It basically says this kills everything in your body. It just kills cancer faster. And so it's an accepted risk to hurt the body. It's actually quite destructive to the body. That's why people who are going through chemotherapy lose their hair, lose a significant part of their body weight. And there's a multi-year process to recovery, right? But it happens to be more effective at curing cancer. So it's really not a very efficient way. Biochemistry is allowing us to say, going back to the drone kind of example, I can attach chemotherapy medicine to cells that only attach to cancer cells. So now I can release that into the bloodstream and it can fly right by all the healthy stuff and find the negative thing and get it. And so the impacts on the patient is reduced 99.5%. So these kinds of breakthroughs to me just fascinate me in terms of where we'll be in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And again, these are breakthroughs that change entire industries. And those are the things that I tend to get out of bed for, is these big paradigm shifts.
Wow. That's so fascinating, right? As I was telling you, it just blows my mind when I hear about these things. It's just like where we're going. It's super exciting. But look at that. We're already at time. This conversation obviously can go on for another hour. But I do want to ask both of you one more question. We've talked about a lot of where we're going, but what advice do you have for, entrepreneurs and founders right now that are building, right? Whether they're building a startup or a venture studio, knowing everything you've just talked about and where we're kind of headed. Give us one piece of advice for each founder. We'll start with you, Donald.
I think the advice I got to give is speak to people. You've got to understand the human component of this. A lot of the success of your products, a lot of the success of your ideas will depend on their accessibility, their acceptability, and their ability to inspire or excite people. And you might get carried away with your technology. That's a great thing, but you've got to engage with your potential audience. You've got to engage with your community, because ultimately it all comes down to this human element. Without that, it's just dead technology.
Yeah. How about you, Mark?
Yeah, I touched on it earlier. I really believe that more so than any time in my startup career, I think you really have to make sure you're pushing the boundaries of how fast things are going to change, and make sure you're building something that's truly disruptive and unique enough that can stand the test of time, or at least defensible. You could do something that's not all disruptive, but it's defensible because you have a unique angle or data source or something like that. And I do think that people are limited by their ability to understand how fast things are about to change or are changing. And so I do encourage people to, if they don't naturally have that instinct, is to surround themselves with Donalds and others to like poke holes and say, okay, put your 5-year hat on and tell me why this is going to be obsolete. And I think that you want to be building companies that you're comfortable won't be.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I see Clint is signing in, and, I just talked to him yesterday. He's one of our Ovation speakers, and is super motivated to come figure out a way that we can collaborate together. And we were just talking about this, it's exciting, but, one of the things that I always, as you know, is thinking about how all of these sort of unexpected disruptions are going to influence our culture, right, and our values. And we have to be resilient. We have to be, adaptable, and how we respond, right? And so I love how at the studio we're building in that culture of learning, of agility, of resilience, right? We prioritize making sure people communicate openly and encourage team members to voice their ideas freely and their concerns. That we're intentionally creating that psychological safety, right, so that we can continue to collaborate, experiment, adapt quickly to these things, because they're going to happen so quickly. And it's like you said earlier, Mark, it's like you see one thing and then you don't even have time to digest it all before the next thing is there, right? And the only way you're going to get past that is by being resilient.
Yeah, and I'll chime in one thing to that, because I think it's just interesting how it's going to affect culture.
Yeah.
We believe a lot in transparency, being very genuine, being, honesty to our core as much as we, humanly can. I had one particular teammate that I got accustomed to their short responses or their grammatical mistakes. And I started getting like 5-paragraph answers that were perfectly eloquently written. And I had to get the person on the call, and I was like, come on, man, WTF, don't send me GPT answers, And so, again, I think more than ever, it's important to be unique and be genuine and embrace that, because I do think while it's exciting to watch where this can go, I do think that's going to stand out more than ever. And so you have to be comfortable with your own voice and not get too lazy as the technology takes over.
Yeah, stay human, right? As Donald said, is we have to make sure that we design with users and make sure we embrace our humanity, our individual humanity, right? So I'll just add one more thing to what Mark just said. I think that's for my one piece of advice I would give to the founders is you have to invest in the growth and development of your team, right? Like there's no way around that. You have to provide skills building and opportunities for people to innovate and use whatever their secret sauce is and being part of that solution. So I think we do a great job of doing that at Nobody Studios. Thank you, Donald and Mark, for joining us here today. This was a great conversation. Really appreciate both of you taking this time. Everybody else, we'll see you next Friday. And don't forget, you can watch all our prior episodes on our YouTube channel at Nobody Crowd. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day, Mark. Bye,
Thanks.
Donald.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.